So, I recently rewatched all four Toy Story movies, and I want to talk about what I think is one of the biggest strengths of this series and franchise. And in doing so, I'm going to refute what I think is one of the most common complaints about Toy Story 4. So, when I watch some sequels or subsequent seasons of television shows, I am really prone to getting the feeling of like, this didn't need to happen, it's not saying anything new, it's just repeating what happened in the first installment or the first season, and that's something I really don't like. Pretty much every Jurassic Park movie or sequel has done it. Multiple Terminator sequels have done it. Even in Star Wars Episode 7, which I really liked at the time before the trilogy kind of fell flat, they really just kind of reset the whole Empire versus Rebellion by renaming and rebranding it, and I didn't like that aspect of it at all. In Terminator, they're always just fighting a new Terminator who has more time travel shenanigans stacked on top of old time travel shenanigans, and it just gets more convoluted. In the Jurassic Park or Jurassic World franchise, it's always just more dinosaurs and more humans who think they can control them, but actually can't. At least in those action franchises, you get fresh action sequences and new ideas there, and of course updated CGI and effects most of the time. Sometimes it looks worse than the original. But those are some examples of sequels that, in my opinion, don't really say anything new. They don't add new themes to the franchise. They don't build on the message of the original movie in a meaningful way. They don't answer questions posed by the first movie. They're just rehashes for more money and more action and just to extend the franchise. I want to give an honorable mention to Home Alone because on the spectrum, Home Alone definitely repeats everything in the first movie, but it's really well done and it's very self-aware that it's doing it, kind of like every Phineas and Ferb episode. So it actually works and it's really funny, and that's one that I give the pass to for sure. But the Toy Story franchise, in my opinion, never retreads in a redundant way. Yes, there are a few beats that repeat a little bit, like the toys having to escape somewhere that they don't want to be, humans walking into the room when they have to freeze before they can accomplish something, Woody and Buzz having disagreements over something and then separating only to be reunited later. But these are small, like literal on paper beats that repeat, and I can forgive those, because what I want to talk about is how the themes and the main messages of each movie continue to be fresh and never feel redundant, and also feel really natural. And what do I mean by feeling natural? I think if you show someone the first Cars movie and then Cars 2, I've always said that Cars 2 kind of got a bad rep because it was called Cars 2. It really has nothing to do with the themes of the original movie. Lightning McQueen isn't even the main character anymore. I've always said people would be more fond of that movie if they just called it Mater or made it clear that it's more of like a spin-off. And when you label it Cars 2, it doesn't feel like a natural progression or experience from the Cars 1 that you watched beforehand. On the other hand, when you watch Toy Story 1 and then you watch Toy Story 2, it really builds on the same main characters. It teaches them new lessons that come from obstacles that feel like are just sort of naturally appearing in their lifespan. And it ends on new ideas and new realizations. And the same characters, namely Woody, who had growth in the previous movie, grow even more in the movie and they learn new lessons. So let me break down what I mean. In Toy Story 1, we have a pretty simple lesson, which is Woody learning not to resent someone who's kind of threatening him or being more popular than him, but actually embrace that person for their strengths and differences, and he ends up becoming best friends with them. Like all of the Toy Story movies, even though the plot is very literal, they're owned by Andy, it's about being a favorite toy, it's very easily generalizable onto life. Kids can relate to a new kid in class, maybe taking up some of the space that they thought they occupied in their social life. Adults can relate to that with in-laws and new coworkers. It's a very generic message that's presented and played out very strongly and competently throughout the first movie. We have Woody learning not to be a jerk when someone comes and threatens your place. It makes you feel jealous, but to embrace them, to be nice to them, and that you're going to be stronger together by making friends with them. I would say, simply put, that's the theme that comes through the first movie to me watching it as a kid and as an adult now. In Toy Story 2, we leave all of that behind, and we immediately establish in the second movie that Woody and Buzz are friends now. We're not retreading that relationship. We're not going to have them hate each other again. They are friends from the very beginning. When Buzz immediately leaps from the table to help Woody find his hat, and then later to help him escape the yard sale. Instead, the movie gives Woody a completely new concern. He's no longer enemies with Buzz. He is now concerned with what happens when Andy grows up. Andy is his whole world, which is something that was centered to the first movie, and that's why the conflict with Buzz started. But now, even with Buzz as a friend, there are realities to that relationship with Andy that he hasn't made peace with. Namely, Andy's going to grow up, he's not going to be there forever, so is it even worth sticking around with Andy, especially when things have now been jeopardized with the rip in his arm, and maybe he won't be fixed, maybe Andy won't want to play with him anymore, maybe he's going to spend the rest of his days with Andy up on that shelf, like what seemingly is happening to Wheezy. And so this is a very new conflict. It feels so natural, I think, because we already established the Andy-Woody dichotomy in the first movie. We know that Andy is Woody's whole world. We know that because that's what made him hate Buzz to begin with. And we also clearly understand the surface level stakes here, which is kids grow up, they don't play with their toys forever. So the rules that the metaphor is operating under are very clear and easy to understand. And again, like the first movie, the lesson is very generalizable. We all know what it's like to be in a position where we kind of think holy crap, this isn't going to last forever. It can't last forever. What do I do about that? And we stress about it, and maybe we think because it's not going to last forever, it's less valuable. Maybe we think we should move on to a different school or a different relationship or whatever it is, just because we know that it's not going to last forever. And of course, the lesson of the movie is that if it's something that you really love and something that you value, even if it's not going to last forever, it's still valuable and you should enjoy it while it lasts. That's a message that I really love, and for whatever reason, even as a 5-year-old or 6-year-old when I was watching Toy Story 2 for the first time, it really resonated with me, and I feel that I've really enjoyed things and taken things in. College, I remember all my friends were anxious to graduate, and I kind of thought this isn't going to last forever, let me just enjoy it while it lasts. I think it's a super powerful message. It builds on the first in a natural way. It's very different from the first, so it feels worthwhile to watch that movie after you've watched the first one, even in the same day, because it's not going to repeat the same message. It's going to give you something new to think about. And it's a great thing for everyone to think about, in my opinion. And then we have Toy Story 3, which, in my opinion, feels even more natural following 2 than 2 does 1, which is really saying something. In 2, we have this literal detail about Andy's going to grow up one day. How do we deal with that? And in 3, we see Andy grow up and we see how they deal with it. 2 is all about accepting it in the moment and accepting that it's not going to last. But 3 lets us see the events actually play out now that he has grown up and the toys need to physically move on. And I would say that Toy Story 3 works on 2 big levels. The first is about the literal details going on in the movie, like physically moving on, growing up, moving out and going to college. And of course, this resonated with a lot of us because we were around that age when the movie came out. And even if you've never moved out and gone to college, we all know what it's like to kind of be scared of growing up or saying goodbye to family members. Or maybe you can even generalize it to some other big event like moving or going to another school. And so we see all this pain around missing someone who you used to be close to, moving on, moving out, and the bittersweet feeling of looking at aspects of your childhood that maybe don't resonate with you as much anymore or that you can never truly experience in the same way as you did when you were a kid. Or, of course, for parents, or in my case, being an older sibling, it lets you reflect on looking back at your child or your little sibling growing up and how bittersweet that can be. But besides relating to the literal plot point of Andy moving out and growing up, there's also the theme and the growth that Woody goes through. And I would simply express that theme as letting go and accepting that your relationship with someone you have to say goodbye to will always be there in your memory, and you never really truly say goodbye. And I think we most clearly see that theme reflected in the moment where Woody is in the box to go to college, while all the other toys are in the box to go to the attic, and he reflects on how Andy's mom is accepting that Andy's moving out, but will always remember the sweet little boy that she's always loved. And Woody realizes that Andy doesn't actually need any of them anymore. That impact they had on his childhood will always be there, so it's time for both parties to move on in a similar way. And I think that's great. Again, this is another unique theme. This is a new lesson for Woody on top of the first 2 that he learned in the first 2 movies. It's relatable, it's impactful, it's something that almost everybody is going to go through in some point in their life, so it's a lesson that you kind of should learn. And yeah, it's that uniqueness that makes Toy Story 3 another banger in the franchise. You could watch these movies 3 days in a row, and thematically, you're never going to be like, wow, they're doing this thing again. The jokes and the small beats might repeat themselves, but the themes and the main lessons are always novel. They're always something new. Woody is always up against a new challenge of life that is relatable, and he always learns a new lesson. And I think that's beautiful, and I actually think that is also true of Toy Story 4. In almost every internet discussion I see on Toy Story 4, there's always a comment that says something like, I just think the 4th one was unnecessary. I think the 3rd one was the perfect end to the franchise. And on the extreme end, people say that the 4th one ruined the franchise or whatever. And I just don't agree with this at all, because I think the 4th one does a good job at presenting a brand new theme and yet another new challenge for Woody, and is therefore a meaningful addition to the franchise. Now, did I expect that 3 was the end of the franchise back then? Yes, of course I did. I even stood up at a South by Southwest panel in front of some Pixar people and said, hey, why are you making Toy Story 4? Toy Story 3 seems like it was the perfect end. Aren't you worried about ruining that legacy? And they kind of said something like, oh yeah, of course we're worried about that, but we've tried to consider the story being meaningful addition. And at the time I was pretty hesitant because I couldn't imagine anything else. But I think they proved themselves right. I think it's a meaningful addition. And when people say they felt like Toy Story 4 was unnecessary, I do know what they're getting at. But really, when you break that down, is any sequel necessary? I mean, even as good as 2 and 3 were, the previous movies don't call for that movie to be made. They're not on cliffhangers or anything like that. The only sequel I would say is necessary is one that ends on like a super obvious cliffhanger. It's necessary that Return of the Jedi comes after The Empire Strikes Back, because the good guys have lost, there's unfinished business, they have a friend that's been kidnapped, something else needs to happen to make that a satisfying story. At the end of the first Toy Story, there's no sequel that needs to be made. There's no sequel that needs to be made at the end of Toy Story 2, even though it might leave you kind of wondering what's going to happen when Andy grows up. And there's no sequel that needs to be made after Toy Story 3. The only thing I'll give this argument is that the end of Toy Story 3 ends on that cloud shot, which brings us full circle to the first shot of the first Toy Story movie, and it does peeve me a little that they kind of broke that visual bookend that they did, because I thought that was really nice. But setting that aside, I think thematically, Toy Story 4 earns its place. If the theme of Toy Story 1 is all about jealousy and making friends, the theme of Toy Story 2 is all about living in the moment and accepting things while they last. The theme about Toy Story 3 is all about how to say goodbye to someone and how to actually move on from a relationship peacefully. The theme of Toy Story 4 is radically different, and it asks the question, what happens when that thing you thought would be perfect ends up not being for you? And again, I think this is a very relatable theme like all three movies. Maybe not quite as relatable as something like living in the moment or growing up and saying goodbye to someone, because everybody goes through that. Nevertheless, I think a lot of people still go through what Toy Story 4 is about. They go through it when they have a dream job or they have a dream school or a dream relationship, and you get into it and you think, all right, I finally have the thing that I've always wanted. And then it doesn't work. The job stresses you out, the people there kind of suck, the culture of the school isn't what you'd expect, you and your romantic partner don't actually work on a lot of levels, the city that you thought you wanted to move to actually has a lot of things about it that you don't really like. I think these are common experiences, and I think people aren't really thinking that critically when they watch Toy Story 4, because I feel this message is pretty obvious. Maybe they're distracted from Forky because he's like the new thing in the movie. He was center in the marketing, and it's really interesting that he's like the first toy we see be born or come to life and all that. But I actually don't think he's really the focus at all. He's kind of like the inciting incident, because seeing Bonnie play with him is what helps Woody realize that things aren't working out for him. Being with Bonnie was that perfect job for Woody, or it was that perfect relationship that he stumbled across. It seemed like a chance at a new life, a new kid who loves him. It's going to give him the same purpose that he had with Andy. He's going to be fulfilled. It's all going to work out. He's set for another 10 years or whatever. That's how Toy Story 3 sets us up to think. We see her playing with Woody. We see how much she loves him. And so we have that same expectation. And I think part of the reason why this message doesn't resonate with everyone is because Toy Story 3 sets this up for us. We don't want to see it not work out. Like, we wanted to believe that would work too. But that's the point of the movie, is challenging this notion and this belief that this thing that seems really good is going to work out. Sometimes it doesn't work out. That's the point. That's the message. And what is Woody to do when he experiences this? What are we to do? Well, I do think that maybe Bo Peep sort of kind of muddies the message a little bit. Because he has Bo Peep, who's someone he knew before, it kind of makes his transition away from Bonnie a little bit easier. And maybe in real life, you don't have someone necessarily who's going to make your transition